Hey, this is JT. Welcome to Bodyweight Strength. In this video, what I'm going to be performing is the upper body training session, which is the accompaniment to the lower body training session and our upper-lower split. The way I suggest you program this is going to be upper body one day, lower body the next day, and then take a day off, or upper body, day off, lower body, day off. This particular training session is going to feature 7 movements that thoroughly work the entire upper body. This is going to be your pressing musculature, your pulling musculature, and your anterior and posterior core. So we're going to address everything. This training session can get a little bit intense depending on how long your rest periods are. Just like in the lower body version of this video, I did 60 seconds of rest between each set. And when you're moving at a brisk pace like that, again, it really makes this efficient cardiometabolic conditioning. If it's too much for you, just extend those rest periods, and as you adapt and you become more fit, you can reduce those rest periods. Now, the next thing you're going to see in this video is a demonstration of each of the 7 movements. That way, if you just want to get to the movements and then go get to doing the actual session, you can do so efficiently. After that, what I'm going to do is demonstrate myself running through the full workout just like I did in the lower body session. So without further ado, let's get to it. The first exercise will be dead hang pull-ups in a hollow body position. So your feet just in front of the body a bit, a slight posterior pelvic tilt, and you're going to come down to a dead hang and then pull chin all the way up over the bar, and that dead hang is going to incorporate the musculature of the upper back as well. Then I'm performing uneven push-ups in the form of elevated archer push-ups with my hand on a ball, and so this allows you to shift more of the load to the pressing arm and basically stimulate the pecs to a greater degree than you would doing push-ups with both hands together. So this is an easy scale up if traditional hollow body push-ups are getting too easy. And the next thing we're going to add in is going to be a ring row, and in this case I'm doing fully suspended ring rows, so you can see my feet in the air, which closely mimics a heavy barbell row. So this is one of my favorites. Outstanding way to work the back, and make sure that you fully protract the shoulders with each repetition. And you can put your feet on the ground as I demonstrate there if the fully suspended row is too difficult for you. After the row, we're going to be adding an additional pressing movement, and it's going to be in the form of a support hold on rings. So it's not a dynamic movement, it's an isometric hold, but it's not easy, and it's going to really build strength and stability throughout the shoulder girdle and the pressing musculature on the rings, which are unstable. So I like to do this until you are nice and stable. Maybe work on the support hold for a month or so before you get into pressing on ring dips. And from there, we need an overhead press to make a complete upper body program. So we're going to insert that here in the form of handstand push-ups, and I'm facing the wall or fence, and you can see my ankle moving through flexion and extension as I press. And facing the fence like this is keeping my body in alignment without low back flexion or a banana back. And so that's why I favor doing it that way for most people. And then our anterior core is going to be hanging leg raise. And so I'm keeping my legs straight. However, you can bend at the knee if needed and scale appropriately for your current level. And from there, to balance out with posterior core work, we're going to be doing the reverse plank, which is, again, one of my favorite movements. And the reverse plank really does target the lumbar musculature well, but also it'll really get the entire posterior chain. So outstanding movement. Okay, now I'm going to demonstrate the training session by going through the entire thing. I'm resting 60 seconds between sets, but I'm editing those rest periods out just so that you don't have to sit through them, and they'll hopefully make this a little more bearable to watch. I'm doing the elevated archer push-ups here, which are a step below. Normally I'm going to be performing true one-arm push-ups. And so the reason that it's important to scale intensity over time, and I've talked about this before, is if you're adding reps to your training in a consistent manner, so every other week or whatever the case is, you're progressing by adding reps or adding time under tension, so adding seconds to the total amount of time that you spend doing that set, then you are progressively overloading, meaning you're providing an additional stimulus to the body, and your body's having to adapt by increasing density of the muscle fibers and building strength, building hypertrophy. But there comes a point I found that you're not just going to add reps forever. Nobody's doing 200 rep sets of push-ups, and so you've got to scale the intensity or the difficulty And in body weight strength training, we can't just put 5 pounds on a bar. We've got to make the movement more difficult. And recent studies show that comparing a push-up to a bench press, as long as you scale the intensity of the push-up is equal to the bench press with regards to building strength and building hypertrophy. So doing this elevated archer push-up shifts more of the load to one side of the body, making the pressing movement more difficult on that side. And so this is a way to mimic adding more weight to the bar. And that's why if you're working toward adding reps to your training and that starts to become less efficient, then what you want to do is scale up the intensity. So, you start out and you can do 10 hollow body push-ups, and then it's 11 and 12. You get to a point where you feel like you're banging your head against the wall and your reps aren't going up. That means it's time to scale the intensity of the movement, make the push-ups even harder, like in this archer position, for example. And then yes, your reps are going to come way down, but the intensity is going up, just as if you added plates to the bar at the gym, and now you can do less reps, but you're moving more weight. And so now what you do is you are likely going to be able to add reps more efficiently as the body learns to utilize that higher intensity level for additional volume. And I've got a video that I'll link to below this that talks about the volume and intensity kind of moving in a wave. And so that is why we have these progression trees to scale intensity up as you get stronger, so that you don't ever have to do 50 and 60 rep sets, because number one, they're really inefficient. But number two, there comes a point where the law of diminishing returns takes over, and you're just not going to be adding reps in a timely manner anymore, and that's going to stall all of your progress. And here I am with the 15 seconds of rest before extending the set. And again, the reason I'm doing that is you'll find that if you get to a point where you're not really high rep on something, but you find that you're not progressing and you're not ready to scale to the next movement. So for example, let's say you are doing these push-ups, but you can only get 6 or 7, right? If you can only get 6 or 7, you're not ready to scale intensity, but you're not adding reps. You can do that mini rest for 15 seconds, and then you can add extending that first set, and what you'll find is that'll often get you past a strength plateau. So the next movement, I go into hollow body pull-ups through full range of motion to really pull the musculature of the upper back in. And one thing that you might want to do, and what I'll probably do with this, is I started the training session with pressing movement and then went into a pulling movement. So the next time around, I'll probably reverse that order. What happens is the antagonistic muscles, or the opposite muscles of the primary ones you're using, they're getting pre-fatigued a little bit. And so I can likely get more pull-ups if I did them first, maybe 1 or 2 additional reps. And so week after week, what I'll probably do is alternate the order of, what I do first, either a press or a pull. And then here's that 15 seconds of rest. After 15 seconds of rest, a extension of the first set. And again, this is basically a way to efficiently get 2 sets of work in without the long rest before the second set. So keeping the training sessions shorter and more efficient. And from a hypertrophy perspective, it may be better to rest longer and get a fuller second set, but that's not what the goal of this overall programming is, which is for efficiency. Now for our second pressing movement, it's going to be support hold on rings. I'm going to externally rotate, rings turned out, to increase the intensity. While we're not dynamically pressing as in ring dips, this movement is very efficient at building strength and hypertrophy throughout the pecs and the shoulder girdle, and really helping you build stability to carry you into those dynamic presses like the ring dips or wide ring dips, which we'll get into later. Another thing that I kind of want to cover is in training to failure, I find that with body weight strength training, I've been able to push most of my reps to failure and it not negatively impact my recovery ability very much. And the body is designed to move itself through space. And so the risk with failure training is that if you're doing it too much, too frequently, perhaps it can negatively impact recovery ability. And when I was doing heavier external loads and training to failure, I did find that. But when I switched to bodyweight strength training, I haven't had that same issue. And from working with different people, I find that that's kind of true with the majority of people, right? They tend to recover really well. But if you don't, if you're training to failure and you find that you feel wiped out, if you find that you feel like you're not recovering well, then you can certainly stop a rep shy of failure, or, in an isometric hold 1 or 2 seconds shy of failure. You will continue to make gains. The problem is not mentally sabotaging yourself and bailing 4 reps shy of failure, or 5 reps shy of failure, or 3 seconds shy of failure. You need to push yourself in your training to force adaptation. And so I don't think you have to go to absolute, momentary muscular failure every time, but I do think you need to have a good intensity of effort and make sure that you are pushing yourself to force adaptation, because if you're not, the body will stop adapting and the results will stop coming. Okay, so on to the fully suspended ring rows. These are not easy to high rep, as you can see. I wasn't high repping them at all. But from there, moving right into the overhead press. And in the overhead press, the key thing to keep in mind is that when you are elevating the scapula, when you're pressing down hard through the floor, you want to get your arms to a fully extended position. So you don't want to have a big bend at the elbow and that's the top of your rep, right? You want to have straight arms, and when you get to the straight arm, you want to push for scapular elevation. Push those scapula down hard toward the floor. And that's key when you start to practice trying to get handstand holds for time. If you're not pressing the scapula hard down through the floor, if you're not elevating the scapula, then it's going to be really difficult for you to get a solid handstand. And then once again, the 15 seconds of rest and going back into the extension of the first set. I talked about training to failure a minute ago, and it's important to point out anytime you're inverted, anytime you're doing handstand work, I absolutely don't suggest training to failure, because you're going to fall on your head. Stop a rep shy of failure. When you feel like you're close to failure, stop and come down. Save enough energy to come down safely. And same thing when you, if you're ever getting into training your back levers or anything like that where you're inverted, you absolutely don't want to train to complete failure, because you want to be able to come down safely. And now going into hanging leg raises. My legs are straight here, but you'll see that as I get close to failing, I'll bend them to, get a little additional work in and truly let the abdominals fail. But you can start these with bent knee. It's just going to depend on where you're at skill-wise. And like with all the training sessions that I'm putting up, I've got the the progression trees for each of these movements. So this would be in the front lever progression tree. If doing this movement's too difficult for you, you can go to the front lever progression tree and you can find the hanging leg raise and just move to the video below it, which will scale you down in intensity a notch. Or you can move to the video past this if you're already high repping these and you want to go to a more difficult movement. So that's the way the channel is structured, to help you scale up and down as needed, so that any of these workouts I post can be tailored to meet your current skill level. And there you can see the bending of the knees to get the additional rep or two. And then finishing off with one of my favorite movements for strengthening the posterior chain is going to be the reverse plank. And the thing with these, whether it's a standard plank or a reverse plank that you do when you train, you eventually get to a point where you can hold these things for a really long time. You're talking 3 minutes, 4 minutes, or even longer. And so what happens is efficiency starts to go down, right? That's a long set. And so what you can do is you can also take a plate or a kettlebell or some weight, and you can basically hold it right above the waist in the center of your reverse plank. So you can hold like a 45-pound plate, like from the chest to the belly button, for example, or a 25-pound plate or whatever. And that will drastically scale the intensity up, making it to where you're not going to be able to hold this movement for anywhere close to as long. And so sticking to our theme of efficiency, it'll just help you get a good amount of work done in a smaller time period. So you can see I'm holding this for a while. If you want to make this more efficient, if you don't want to have to hold reverse plank for several minutes, then I would suggest increasing the intensity by holding on to a weight. Now, whether or not you're holding on to a weight, when you perform these, you want to drive down hard through the heels and the shoulder blades, and you want to take your hips and press them up toward the sky. And by doing this, by maintaining a little bit of an arch, you're really going to hammer the musculature in the lumbar region, which we want, but you're going to continue to make this movement harder by doing this. If you just have the goal of staying up and you're starting to sag a tiny bit, if you don't have that arch, if you're not pressing down hard through the heels, then this movement will be less effective, but you'll be able to hold it longer. So the goal is not just to hold it for as long as possible. The goal is to hold it for as long as possible while pressing down through the heels and pressing down through the shoulder blades and pressing up through the hip musculature. So to hold it as long as possible while contracting the muscles like that is what you're going for. And I'm getting close to the point of failure here. And something to point out in these isometric holds, so like a standard plank or the reverse plank, they get to being very uncomfortable. And you really want to come down out of these things. And the temptation to come down well before the point of failing is real. So what I suggest is keeping that intensity of effort high, and whether or not you go all the way to the true moment of muscular failure, if you come down 1 second or 2 seconds shy of failure, you're still going to make adaptations. But the temptation to come down 3 or 4 or 5 seconds shy of failure, but tell yourself it was just shy of failure, is something that you want to try to avoid. Intensity of effort is important. Your body's an adaptive organism. It's going to adapt to you pushing it. So make sure that you are truly pushing it so you continue to adapt and make changes. And with that, I'm about to end this extension set, this technique to extend that set. And with that, that wraps up performing the actual training session. And so now I'll go into a quick recap and see you in the next video. So that wraps up our upper body session. And keep in mind that I programmed this upper-lower split to give you a blend of strength adaptation, stimulus for hypertrophy, and also to help you build cardiometabolic conditioning. So in this session, I rested 60 seconds between sets. You may start out based on your own conditioning level, needing 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes between sets, and that's perfectly fine. Cardiometabolic conditioning improves fairly quickly. So within 2 weeks, if you're at 2 minutes of rest, drop down to, say, 1 minute 45 seconds. 2 weeks later, drop down to 1.5 minutes. You can basically just scale your rest between sets down to make the overall training session have a higher impact on your cardiovascular fitness and your conditioning level. And in that way, you don't need to go do additional running or Stairmaster, cycling, whatever it is. You can do additional endurance work if you like it. If it's fun for you and you want to do it, by all means, additional exercise is certainly good for you. But I tried to program this to where it's efficient and it gives you improvements in all 3 areas: hypertrophy, strength, and cardiometabolic conditioning. So that's really the goal. If you have questions about this program, ask in the comments below. If you have not subscribed to my channel, go ahead and do so and click the notification bell so you don't miss any content. And thank you for supporting Bodyweight Strength.